The dust of Abilene settled slow that Tuesday morning, the sun already high and hot over the Kansas plains. A train had just pulled in, not with cattle or supplies, but with a different kind of cargo, one that hushed the usual bustle of the station platform. A man, his face weathered not by sun but by whiskey, stood beside his daughter. Her name was Clara, and she was barely 18. She kept her eyes on the worn planks of the platform, her shoulders hunched as if to ward off the stares of the townsfolk gathering around. Her father, a failed prospector named Jed, was shouting. His words were slurred, but sharp enough to cut through the morning air. He'd lost everything, he bellowed, and he couldn't feed another mouth. He pointed a trembling finger at a stout, well-dressed man stepping off the train-a-land speculator from back east, with a cold glint in his eye. Jed offered Clara to him, not as a bride, but as an indentured servant, to settle a gambling debt. He called it an arrangement, a chance for her. But everyone knew what it was. It was a sale. The crowd grew, a silent ring of judgment. Shopkeepers, ranchers, mothers with their children, they all watched. There was pity in some eyes, but no one moved. No one spoke. The silence was a weight, pressing down on Clara, heavier than the summer heat. The speculator looked her over, a smirk playing on his lips as if inspecting livestock. Clara's bonnet did little to hide the single tear that traced a path through the dust on her cheek. The shame was a physical thing, a brand being pressed into her in the open square for all to see. Her father grabbed her arm, ready to push her forward. The air crackled with the unspoken cruelty of the moment. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. Just as he was about to hand her over, a voice cut through the silence. It wasn't loud, but it had the authority of stone. That's enough. The voice belonged to a man standing near the station's water tower. He was tall and lean, his face a mask of calm composure. He wasn't a lawman or a preacher. He was an Apache man named Nakai, who worked a small parcel of land just outside of town. He mostly kept to himself, trading hides for supplies and speaking only when necessary. Now, every eye in the crowd turned to him. Jed sneered. "This ain't your business, Indian." Nakai took a slow step forward, his worn boots making no sound on the dusty ground. He didn't look at Jed. He didn't look at the speculator. His gaze was fixed on Clara, not with pity, but with a quiet respect that seemed to give her a sliver of ground to stand on. "Not here," Nakai said, his voice even. "Let her be." The speculator scoffed, adjusting his tie. "This is a private matter. A debt is owed." Nakai finally turned his eyes to the man from the east. There was no threat in them, just a simple, unshakable fact. "This is a public shame. he stated, and it ends. The tension shifted. The crowd, once a silent jury, began to murmur. Nakai's simple words had given voice to the decency they had swallowed. The station master, a man who had known Clara since she was a girl, cleared his throat and stepped forward. Then the blacksmith. Then the sheriff, who had been watching from the doorway of his office, finally made his way through the crowd, his hand resting not on his gun, but on his belt. "Jed," the sheriff said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You'll come with me. We'll talk about your debts at the office." To the speculator, he added, "And you, sir?" "The next train east leaves at 4. I suggest you be on it." Jed sputtered, but the wall of silent townsfolk had turned against him. His authority, built on bluster and cruelty, had crumbled. He let go of Clara's arm. The speculator, seeing his advantage lost, gave a disgusted huff and retreated back toward the train car. The show was over. Clara stood alone for a moment, the crowd parting around her. The shame hadn't vanished, but it no longer felt like a cage. She looked up, her gaze finding Nakai, who was already turning to leave. Melting back into the background as quietly as he had emerged. He paused and looked at her, his expression unreadable. He simply said, "She has a home." He wasn't speaking to the crowd, or even to her. It was a statement of fact, as plain as the sky above. Then he was gone. No one cheered. There was no applause. The West wasn't a stage for heroes. The crowd simply dispersed, the men tipping their hats with a newfound respect as they passed Clara. The women offering small, supportive smiles. The pastor's wife came and gently took Clara's hand, leading her away from the station, toward the church, toward a quiet place to sit. Clara later found work at the Mercantile, her diligence and quiet grace earning her a place in the community. She never saw her father again. She would sometimes see Nakai in town, and they would exchange a silent nod, an acknowledgement of the debt that could never be repaid with money. It was a moment forged not in violence or grand speeches, but in the simple, steady force of a man who knew what was right. Out here, on the edge of the world, where laws were still being written, and society was a fragile thing, you learned that a person's worth wasn't a debt to be traded. You learned that mercy, once given, could outlast shame, and that sometimes the strongest thing a person could do was to stand in the quiet and declare that another human being belonged, not to a man, not to a debt, but to the world itself. Thanks for watching.